Nuclear energy is a battleground of disagreement between those for and those against.
The whole system's crazy. Uranium miners are dying of cancer, people who live in the uranium tailings are getting cancer and will continue to get cancer. The nuclear workers are getting cancer. The men who watch the explosions of the bombs, the GIs are getting cancer. The children who live downwind from the tests are getting leukemia. The people who live near waste facilities almost certainly will develop an increased incidence of malignancy in the future, I predict.
On the other side, supporting nuclear power are a large section of the public and many scientists and engineers. Also in support are the utilities, as well they might be, since there are over 70 nuclear plants in operation with billions of dollars invested.
At a time when the United States is 25% dependent on unreliable, expensive oil imports, it makes no sense to phase out a proven, reliable domestic source of energy, such as nuclear plants. Those plants currently provide 13% of our electrical capability, and the plants that are under them are so dependent on foreign sources of energy.
As fossil fuels become scarce and costly, we must replace them with other sources of power. Nuclear energy is one of the alternatives. What happens within the thick steel and concrete dome of the containment building is mysterious to most of us. However, the principle of generating power from nuclear energy isn't hard to understand. Most conventional generating plants are powered by coal, oil, or gas. Water is heated to produce steam, which turns a turbo generator to make electricity. The principle of a nuclear power plant is the same, except that nuclear fission is used to produce the heat. Commercial nuclear energy was started under President Eisenhower, who felt that atomic weapons could be made more acceptable to other nations if peaceful uses of the atom were also developed.
Then the utilities were persuaded by the Atomic Energy Commission that nuclear power would be so cheap that you wouldn't have to meter it. That's literally what they were told. And the utilities, always interested in making more money, bought that idea, ordered plants with a good deal of government help, and the nuclear power industry began.
Opposition to nuclear energy springs from one basic fact. If radioactivity gets loose, it can be deadly.
Radiation damages genes, and it causes cancer, and it changes the genes in the eggs and the sperm of human beings, and those eggs and sperm produce new human beings. So if the genes are changed so the new human beings will be damaged, and the damaged genes can be passed on from generation to generation. The nuclear fuel cycle produces radiation at each step, from the mining of uranium, to the milling of uranium, to the nuclear reactor, to the waste storage facilities, to bombs, to plutonium, all the way along. The materials produced in the nuclear fuel cycle are extremely dangerous, are extremely radioactive, if they get inside your body.
The government has worked hard to calm opposition and fears from the beginning.
Since their birth on the banks of the Ohio River at Shippingport, Pennsylvania, commercial nuclear power plants have established a proven record of safe, reliable performance. It is a major technological development with a demonstrated overriding concern for public health and safety.
Some years ago, the Atomic Energy Commission predicted that 500 to 800 nuclear power plants would be in operation by the year 2000, generating about 50% of our electricity. Not so. By 1980, only 70 reactors were operating. About 90 were authorized or being built, and fewer than 30 were in the planning stage. If public opposition continues, it's probable that even all of these won't be built. Construction of many plants has been delayed or even stopped, some by states which have opposed the federal government. Active opposition is a major reason.
Over 400 people arrested this year, and I personally feel that this is a stepping stone on the way to an even larger action to keep nuclear power out of California and out of the United States. I feel it's that important for me as an individual and me as an organizer to be able to protect not only myself and my kids, but generations to come from the specter of nuclear death.
The controversy focuses on two concerns: waste management and reactor safety. Normally, a nuclear power plant is a remarkably safe place. Under no circumstances could there be an atomic explosion. The radioactive fuel rods are kept submerged, usually in water, so they won't get dangerously hot. Surrounding this core are many safeguards.
Regarding the safety margins around plants, we put the radioactive parts of the plant inside of a massive steel vessel that has walls 8 to 10 inches thick of steel. We put that vessel inside of concrete walls that are 3 to 4 feet thick. And all of this is inside of a massive structure that has massive concrete walls, again 3 to 4 feet thick, with steel liners around all of that will not allow radioactivity to leak out.
The principal danger is that something might happen to the reactor's cooling system because of an earthquake, human error, or mechanical failure. The reactor can be shut down, but that doesn't stop the heat. The reactor has to be flooded with emergency cooling water within a short time, or a serious accident may result. Much of the safety controversy concerns the possibility that something might happen to the emergency cooling system. If it failed, the core would get hotter and could melt the reactor.
A melting accident is the most feared kind of accident that can happen at a nuclear plant. The immense amounts of radioactivity inside generate a great deal of heat, and if this heat isn't controlled by emergency systems or something else in the course of an accident, the reactor can overheat enormously, reach soaring temperatures, and melt with all of its radioactive contents down into the ground, possibly rupturing the building, setting the stage for a release of radioactivity in prodigious amounts to the environment, where it could sweep across the land borne by the wind and bring death or injury to thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps millions of people. A catastrophe on an absolutely immense scale.
At 3 Mile Island in 1979, a series of human errors and mechanical failures caused major damage to the core and the escape of radioactivity. This close call at TMI has caused an intense reevaluation of the safety issue.
We've gone further though, and we said, suppose that core did melt. Suppose it had melted, what would have happened then? And the analyses show that it would not have been a dripping, runny, hot mess that just keeps going on down to China somewhere, but that it would have been a hot mass, a hot bunch of metal, that eventually, and it would take some time, could possibly melt through the reactor vessel, this massive 8 to 10 inch thick vessel. And it would drop through there, and then it would land on the floor of the reactor building. Now this building has floors, the floors are 9 to 10 feet thick, with concrete and steel. The studies show that that molten mass would become cooled and stabilized inside that building and would not have melted through.
There wasn't a major disaster at TMI, but many people believe that there could have been.
I think that the experiences at 3 Mile Island have shown to a great many people what many of us, my colleagues and I in the Union of Concerned Scientists and other scientists have learned, namely that there's a very high chance of human error, mechanical failure, the discovery of design mistakes in nuclear reactors, the discovery of faultily installed parts, and all kinds of difficulties, which can take a small accident and make it become much worse, aggravating it enormously and setting the stage for a possible major release of radioactivity.
I think many lessons were learned from the 3 Mile Island accident. Among them were that reactor operators were improperly trained to respond to off-normal circumstances, that the flow of communications following accidents in utility companies to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to the state government, and to the public at large was inadequate, that there was inadequate insurance provision to pay for the replacement power that is occasioned by a major outage of a nuclear plant. On the other hand, I think it's impossible to say that there will be no accidents ever at a nuclear plant. What we can say is that we will train reactor operators to respond properly, that we will design systems with sufficient resiliency so that if accidents occur, the public health consequences will be minimized.
In order to reduce the likelihood of future TMI to accidents or more serious ones, that there must be a fundamental change in the organization, the procedures, the practices, and above all in the attitude of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the nuclear industry.
The 3 Mile Island accident has caused a tightening of safety regulations. The question remains, how safe is safe enough? Spent fuel must be replaced from time to time. What to do with this highly radioactive material is a problem that is unsettled and unsettling. One part of the difficulty is how to transport radioactive waste with absolute safety, since it could be disastrous if it got loose in the environment. The government has run container tests and is satisfied that even the most extreme accident couldn't cause a spill. The real dangers come from processing and storing the wastes. Wastes contain radioactive substances that decay at different rates, many of them within the first few months. But some, such as plutonium, must be kept completely out of the environment for many thousands of years. Again, the government made a film in the early 70s, prematurely giving soothing assurances that the waste disposal problem was solved.
In a few years, rail cars carrying solid radioactive waste will begin moving out from atomic facilities destined for permanent storage. These radioactive wastes, traveling by commercial rail, safe enough to be transported and handled like any other freight, will be shipped to Lyons, Kansas, there to be permanently and safely stored 1,000 feet below the surface in a salt mine.
The mine was found to be unsafe, fortunately before the wastes were buried. Another episode that did nothing to increase public confidence in the government's nuclear program. There is still no waste disposal solution. The radioactive wastes are stored temporarily in pools of water at each one of the plant sites. Meanwhile, scientists and engineers are looking for a permanent solution.
All the techniques involve solidifying the waste to put it into a relatively immobile form, then putting the waste into a remote area, such as thousands of feet underground, and putting it in such a way that there are barriers around the waste so that any water from the ground couldn't get to the waste. And then if the water could get to the waste and could dissolve the waste, then the geologic media would protect it for thousands of years, even beyond that.
This is one of the laboratories where they are experimenting with ways to solidify wastes and incorporate them in glass. The glass would then be encased in concrete, ceramics, and metals. Finally, The proposal is to bury the wastes in rock or salt formations that have remained undisturbed for thousands of years.
There are many people who believe, and I join them in believing, that the continued production of radioactive waste in the continuing absence of a way of dealing with it is becoming more and more irresponsible with each passing day, with each passing year. There is a great deal of radioactive waste already in the United States. We will be forced to find a solution for disposing of it, independent of the future of nuclear power. And yet the future of nuclear power is dependent on finding a solution. We cannot go on producing radioactive waste if we are going to leave this lethal legacy dangerous and waiting for successive generations.
The trouble is that no laboratory test can prove safety for hundreds of years. And no scientist can say with certainty what will happen within the Earth's crust during thousands of years. And so the waste piles up in temporary storage. The government is cautious about making a decision.
The waste disposal siting responsibility rests with by federal law with the United States government. The Department of Energy must select and construct and operate the site. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission must license it. In my judgment, those agencies have been remiss in selecting a site and getting it under construction. I think the time to do that is now because the public, I believe, perceives inaction as inability. I think we have the ability to act, but I don't think we have in the past had the will to act.
Well, I think there should be a much more effective regulation. Maybe not more regulation, but more effective regulation. And it's clear to me, and it was certainly clear to our whole commission, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is far from adequate to do the job.
Those are the first important steps, the launching of a decent program and the removal of authority from the Department of Energy.
The fact is that we already have a large accumulation of wastes, most of them, incidentally, the product of weapons manufacture. They have to be disposed of. The government needs to act. Another problem with nuclear reactors is that they operate with uranium, and uranium supplies may last only about another 40 years. Without some way to stretch the fuel supply, nuclear power would die from lack of fuel.
A breeder reactor has the desirable attribute that it can expand our uranium resources by a factor of roughly 50. That means that instead of having 40 years supply, we'll have a few thousand years supply of energy. I think the breeder reactor offers the prospect of bridging the time frame to the development of solar and fusion from the current generation of energy-producing devices such as light water reactors and coal. The extent to which we use breeder reactors, I think, will be dependent largely on the rapidity with which solar and fusion come along and begin to take up their share of the energy burden.
Some other countries are planning to use breeder reactors, and we are experimenting here despite the breeder's hazards. For one, liquid sodium used in breeders presents even greater safety problems than conventional reactors. For another, the breeder would produce or breed its own fuel, plutonium, which is also used for bombs. Large amounts of plutonium in circulation would increase the likelihood of theft and terrorism.
There's one problem with nuclear power which is not very well known to the people in the United States. That is, there's a connection between nuclear power and nuclear bombs. The materials in nuclear reactors could be stolen and fabricated into crude nuclear weapons, and also nuclear plants are subject to terrorism, to sabotage, with devastating effects. None of these problems are satisfactorily controlled at the present time, and it is a very serious component of the nuclear dilemma that the United States faces.
The nuclear power industry is beset by troubles, by highly charged opposition, by public doubts. Among the conflicting voices, how do we decide?
The fundamental problem is that the development of nuclear power involves the creation by human beings of a radioactive material, or radioactive materials, which are very detrimental to life. And if we go on accumulating these things over the decades to come with ever more power plants, ever more use of radioactive materials, creation of radioactive materials, we are bound to have a devastating impact on life.
And so without the nuclear power, we would have many blackouts and brownouts in the 80s. Half the country would not even have enough power to generate their day-to-day requirements under normal circumstances.
We need an enormous amount of electricity. Can we afford to phase out nuclear energy? Can we risk an energy future based on plutonium in the breeder reactor? We have to decide.